Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, Salatu Wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa azwajihi wa dhurriyyatihi ajma'in. Harvey, we had stopped here. Hopefully this would be the last one, but let's see. Harvey also introduces the theory of regional value regimes. Regional value regimes. Value is important because, we are talking about value and anti-value. To analyze the geopolitical battles that shape flows of credit and the special displacement of crises on a global scale. Uneven geographical development, he argues, has produced distinct regional value regimes. Distinct. What does he mean by distinct? Regional value regimes around which power blocks compete on the world stage. Compete for what? So the concept of regional value regimes, I don't know what he means by that, but let's think about it a bit. When we talk about, conceptually speaking anyway, when we talk about capitalism, what we talk about is concentration. Concentration of whatever, of capital basically, obviously, because without concentration you cannot accumulate. So capitalism, if capitalism is accumulation for the sake of accumulation, then concentration and unprecedented concentration of money, wealth, whatever takes the form of capital, and power, obviously, because money is power as well, and closely linked to the powers. So huge concentration is the hallmark of capitalism, especially as it develops, as it matures. And that has many consequences, but one of its consequences is that there's going to be huge disparities and inequalities, and because concentration means that when something is concentrating, it is concentrating from somewhere else. Capitalism, by its very nature, creates disparities in income and wealth and power and uneven development. And uneven geographical development, what he is talking about. Development. So that's within the meaning, and generally, especially generally you have to put limits on capital to overcome these uneven developments, or at least redress them to a certain extent. And there are many strategies for that. And this is possible firstly because capital and those who are looking after the interests of capital, they realize that a long-term success of capitalism requires that some of those disparities and uneven developments are redressed. So that's the basic strategy and core or centers of capitalism. So and other possibility is that capital is not that strong, or at least not that strong vis-a-vis all other forces. So for example, if it's a strong national state, so there's a national capitalism, so that's the capitalism as well, but nation is a limit on capital. So you are accumulating for nation and its strength and not for, so that puts some limits on those sort of disparities and uneven developments, etc. So this is at the conceptual level. So how is that related to this concept of uneven? Was talking about regional value. So regional value regimes generally can be either of the type where the interest of capital requires that some of those disparities are addressed, or capital is not that strong against certain nations or regions, so they will try to put limits on the capital, for example, so to redress or some of those disparities and what Harvey is calling uneven geographical development. So this is at the conceptual level, but how it happens in concrete obviously develops. Obviously depends on the actually existing power configuration and the relative strength of capital vis-a-vis other forces, and also the competing capitalist strategies regarding short-term and long-term and all that. Okay. So Harvey also introduces a theory of regional value regimes to analyze the geographical or geopolitical battles that shape flows of credit and the special displacement of crises on a global scale. Uneven geographical development, he argues, has produced distinct regional value regimes around which power blocks compete on the world stage. There are power blocks within capitalism because of national and regional limits on. Let's talk a bit about that. I think politically speaking, the basic difference, the most important distinction from the perspective of understanding capitalism is the distinction between center and periphery. And when there is a hierarchy, obviously we are talking about at the conceptual level most of the time. Hierarchy, there is a hierarchy between among the players in the center, as well as there is a hierarchy of periphery. So generally they defined the distinction between center and periphery as by center they mean nations with high level of consumption, development, develop economic structures and sophisticated technology. And the periphery consists of those dependent nations which economies are tightly integrated to those with the centers. They are dependent on them, but more conceptually correct, I think, understanding is center is where the capital find itself safe and well entrenched politically, socially, and culturally, and a nation's or a region's place in the center will be defined accordingly. And periphery is, on the other hand, where the capital doesn't find itself safe culturally, spiritually, uh, socially, etc. Uh, so the capitalist strategies, political strategies, will be totally different vis-a-vis center as well as periphery. Um, and because I said there is a hierarchy, so within the center there is a center and periphery as well. Like within developed nations, for example, there's even like in America, for example, what they can do vis-a-vis like neighborhoods, they can never do, against the wide neighborhood, or even within wide neighborhood, what they can do vis-a-vis poor white neighborhood is never the same, etc. So this is just an example. So political strategies um, depend on that, and one of the obviously capital by its very nature, especially financially dominant capitalism, is ridden with periodic crises, and one of the strategy of crises. Overcoming crises is spatial displacement, and that is spatial displacement uh, mainly work on this model of central and periphery, etc. So I thought that was important. Yeah. Okay, so Harvey also introduced the theory of regional value regimes to analyze the geopolitical battles that shape flows of credit and spatial displacement of crises on a global scale. Uneven geographical development, he argues, has produced distinct regional value regimes around which power blocks compete on the world stage. Now, this competition can be, like just conceptually speaking, is political as well as economic, and obviously political, economic, or power, or money are just the two sides of the same coins. Two sides of the same coin as far as capitalism is concerned. Capitalism if we define it as accumulation for the sake of accumulation, then it is by its very nature global and universal. and that creates a major contradiction within capitalist regional regimes as well as global regimes working today, in the sense that although capital is global predominantly today, the political organization is at the national level. The legitimacy of political regimes is drawn from distinct, national boundaries and all that. And obviously, all nations, even though most of them are capitalist nations, they compete to accumulate for their own sakes, and that creates a um, contradiction with the requirements of accumulation for the sake of accumulation, because capital by its very nature, it doesn't, or it shouldn't worry about where the accumulation is happening. It should happen where it is most optimal, for example. And obviously, to avoid those or overcome those contradictions, capitalist international political organization is created, but it can never, play the role of a global state, because what capitalism requires is a global state, but it is unable to do that. So, in the absence of that, the state which tries to fulfill the role of the global state of capital is America. But America has this contradictory role, in the sense that America is a nation state. So as a nation state, it is interested in its own accumulation, etc. But on the other hand, it is sort of the only state which can play the real role of the global state for the capital. And obviously those roles are contradictory, and what you see in American politics, competition between those roles and all those things. And that's why America can never really get that legitimacy among capitalist states, which it would have had it been a purely a global state, for example. And the competition he is talking about mainly stems from this contradiction. Okay, so uneven geographical development, he argues, has produced distinct regional value regimes around which power blocks compete on the world stage. Each power block managed by a state-financed nexus made up of private capital, central banks, and treasury departments of powerful state. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, for instance, was designed by the United States and Japan to constrain the ability of Chinese and European companies to build market share in Asia. Similarly, as infrastructural development slows in China, the Chinese government is exporting surplus steel along with cheap credit to encourage countries around the world to carry out infrastructural projects. Donald Trump's trade war must be seen in that context. Okay, so let's stop here and we'll start next time from overall. Hopefully we'll wrap it up. Okay.